Pete Burridge, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's long overdue.
Thanks for having me on. I've been, listening to your show from way back when, and everything that you do for just making knowledge so much more accessible to everyone it's class. So for me to be able to be a guest rather than a listener is kind of a unique experience. So I'm very thankful for you having me on.
No, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. And a recent viral tweeter on LinkedIn poster. Yeah, and just checked before we press record, and it was the speed training video, which was, I guess, captured from one of your analysts who films training.
Our analysts do a class job, and they put up with me pestering them all the time for clips for me reviewing for the lads, but also reviewing my own coaching. So I'm a bit of a nose with that, but being able to have that so accessible and being able to make a sort of montage of it, was really cool. So, I didn't expect it to go like that mental. I couldn't click the top of my phone for about 2 days, but I'm glad that guys are enjoying it, and hopefully more people out there can share some of their stuff so that I can steal some of the bits that they put out, and just grow the industry, I guess.
Absolutely. Just on that, are you mic'd up, or do you just look at where you're positioned and that kind of thing, or can you actually hear yourself and what you're saying?
Yeah, so in the past I have mic'd myself up or coached with a GoPro on, but obviously that's quite intrusive. And I remember once old job had the old glasses with the camera in the middle, and everyone's looking at you like, what on earth are you doing? So because our cameras can pick up sound fairly well, you can pick up some of your cues that you're saying, or how you're interacting with the lads. So you do get some pieces, sometimes, probably more often than not now, I'm more looking at it from a perspective of how the lads have got on. But every now and again I do try and do a little bit of coach evaluation of my own self, and it's just sometimes enlightening to realize how much faff you say in between, and what cues have landed or haven't when you watch it back. So
Off the cuff question, Pete. Any big change you've made based on that? And the only reason I ask this is because I'm guessing there's probably 99% of people out there have thought that'd be a really good idea, but actually doing it and listening to yourself and watching yourself, it's grim at the start. So is there any? It is, 100%. But is there anything that you've changed in a big way based on that, which may just tip people over the edge to go, I'm going to put a GoPro on myself, or I'm going to try to get one of the analysts to film it?
One of the things that you read some of the coaching research around how do you get engagement, how do you kind of challenge understanding, and there's a difference between a lad just parroting back 2 words that you've said and getting a sort of deeper understanding. And I think one of the things that I found, I was quite good at questioning, but never really delved deeper than sort of the first question. So as soon as I got the buzzword I was looking for, I moved on. I've certainly noticed that sometimes qualify that question, and if someone says the word, let's take it to a speed context. If I'm asking someone and they say okay, what's important in acceleration, and they say projection, you're like, well done. Me in the past would have probably gone, yeah, brilliant, they all know what they're on about, I've done my job. But actually quite often they're just saying the buzzwords that they know you want to hear. So it's then, okay, well, what do you mean by projection? And then hopefully you then get a little bit deeper of when we're talking about projection, it's about getting into a loaded position. Brilliant. Okay, what does a loaded position mean? And you get 3-4 levels down, and you really start to challenge the lads' understanding. And it's sometimes pretty enlightening when you realize, when you get that silence after that second question, you're like, ooh, maybe my message hasn't landed as well as I'd hoped. Things like that would probably be the things that I've changed the most. Obviously sometimes the intrusiveness of a GoPro or wearing funky glasses, probably you coach differently, plus the athletes behave differently in front of you, so you don't really get a very representative example of what your coaching environment is. So having an analyst in a background, or just having a camera set up just in the back and just sort of watching it back, can be sometimes interesting when you see some of the things you didn't see, or because of the way, like bringing it to a gym setting, it might be that you've stood with your back to half of the group because you're wanting eyes on one guy, but actually you've then lost that vision of being able to see a group. If you're coaching, say, 30 lads at once, which I found in an academy setting, sometimes you have to kind of be a little bit above it, and where you stand can be quite important, I think.
So for those that don't have the luxury of an analyst with a camera, do you think a GoPro is the next best thing, or is there not a better alternative? Do you think?
If I'd say probably maybe just setting up a phone on a tripod, because like iPhones are good enough now that you get decent field of vision, and just sort of setting it up in the background. You may let the lads know, like, oh, by the way, I'm recording this session. It's less about you. It's probably more for me. But sometimes, like, I found when I was doing that, like, even in a gym setting, you see a clip that you're like, oh, like it. Sometimes it's quite intrusive in a session to be like, do that squat again, but I'm now going to film you, and we're going to bring you in front of this iPad, and then we're going to talk about it, and then you're going to go back and lift again. Whereas sometimes if it's just in the background, you can get busy coaching, and then when you come to review it afterwards, you're like, oh, that's a really good example of where, like, his range has gone too low, and he's getting butt wink or something, or right, okay, like he's really not controlled that rep on the way down, and he's bounced out the hole, and I've been telling him about it, but like I haven't really like been able to show him. And you can just clip that up, send him a little WhatsApp, like, this is what we were talking about. And I found that certainly is like really valuable in terms of like layering that extra level of understanding and being able to influence the guys outside of the, say, 40 to 60 minutes that we get with them in our coaching sessions.
Love it. So Bristol Bears at the minute, previously come from Leicester. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah. So
give me a little insight into the journey.
Oh yeah, a long one. I guess I started after failed footballer, then Loughborough University, internship at Leicester Tigers, very brief internship at Tottenham, then year long at Leicester City, just before all the good stuff started happening, unfortunately, and then did 2 years at Exeter Uni. I'd say, even though that's probably the less glamorous of all of the roles that I've done, that was probably where I learned the most as a coach, in terms of just you getting so much time on the gym floor. You develop loads as a coach. Then after the 2 years at Exeter, got the call to come back to Leicester, did 6 seasons there, multitude of roles, from analyst to, sports scientist to academy S&C to first team S&C. And then now been at Bristol for just over 18 months in my third season now. So long journey, but keep heading seemingly between the Southwest and the Midlands, just doing a back and forth between the two.
Nice. Did we connect when you were at Exeter Uni?
Yeah.
Didn't we? That was it.
When you were working with lacrosse, was that right?
Yeah, that was right. Yeah, because we had a few girls who were at uni.
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot about that.
That was an interesting coaching challenge, obviously, going from coaching like footballers and rugby players to having female lacrosse athletes who like only knew cardio, and having to try and literally sneak weights into their programs. I'm sure you know. There was some interesting strategies. You had to borrow from CrossFit and like aerobics class, like HIIT classes, to do 10 minutes on the treadmill, but interspersed, you've got to do 10 press ups and 8 lunges and stuff, like very, very much against what you're like kind of you're taught in the UKSCA. But like that was the way, the gateway drug to get the girls to get bought into lifting. And that was probably took 2 years to get the girls to the stage where they could almost handle, from a buy-in perspective, the more generic 5 sets of 5 back squat type programs. Like they were not interested in that at all. But I'm sure you had the same issues yourself.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I think just going back on that, the university setting, I mean, I wasn't as prestigious sport university as Exeter, and but it was great because it was just group after group after group after group. Whereas in a football club, I'd maybe have one under 18s group in a morning, and then an under 12 and under 13s group in the evening, and that was pretty much the day. But I think universities, for younger, more developing coaches, and for experienced coaches, but specifically for the younger and developers, so good.
Yeah.
So good.
it's like the perfect pathway, I think, for those guys that have done internships or placements where you're looking for that first role. It's perfect because it's an environment maybe with a little less pressure. You get a chance to make a ton of mistakes, and like you said, like the amount of volume of coaching that you get to do. Like usually as an intern, like the traditional internship is like you're filling up water bottles, making protein shakes, and maybe you get a chance to take a rehabber or some guy who's like on trial, or like you're taking a really young group, and that's the only coaching time you have, and like you'd probably coach 8 hours in one day, which is like your entire coaching budget for a week in a pro setting. So like in terms of your development curve, it's even though again the badge on the tracksuit might not be as prestigious, like in terms of your own development, like I can't stress it enough. It's such a good spot. And don't get me wrong, like when I left Leicester City and Leicester Tigers, I was devastated that the Knockout missed the penalty and we weren't going up to the Prem, and I didn't get kept on at Leicester Tigers and stuff. But like looking back, like those 2 years I spent at University of Exeter, I just wouldn't be like I'm nowhere near in terms of my development without those years of kind of learning and making mistakes, I guess.
Absolutely agree. Well, just bringing it around to the main topic that we're going to chat around. It was about the article that we published on Sportsmith, and it was great. Really, really good. And it was about the myths around speed training and interspersed lots of your learnings from various different settings. So that was great. But I want to dive into a few of those for the next 45 minutes. So myths around speed training. One of the first ones that you mentioned was that you can't coach speed. And it was a nice little T-shirt that you modelled as well, the Nike ones. That was cool. And interesting that they'd gone with that. Was it a few years ago?
Yeah, I don't know if it was linked to, obviously Nike based in Oregon, and their football team were built around playing fast, and I think they latched onto that, but it went sort of viral before things went viral, where to the point that you'd have like Eli Manning and Tom Brady tweeting, "You can't coach speed," sort of tongue in cheek because they're not known for being fast. When they'd like scored a touchdown off of a run or something, and like that sort of proliferated the message that like really, if you wanted a fast team, you had to go out and recruit speed. Like you couldn't work on it, and it was just this innate quality that genetics drove. And don't get me wrong, like there is an element to that, but I think maybe because that message was so strong, and still even now today, there's some people that I know that still really think that like you really can't make any inroads or any sort of meaningful inroads that in terms of like make change in terms of on the field when it comes to speed. I dispute that. Obviously, I'm majorly biased, but it's even backed up in research that like the guys out in Norway, I think it's Thomas Hagen, showed that like pretty much once you get to age 20, 22, like the speed gains really start dwindling, and I guess that's in a team sport setting as well, similar to mine, but from sort of my practice-based evidence, I can see that you can make change, and it can be lasting, but it takes a lot of investment, takes good quality coaching, a culture around speed from a buy-in perspective from the players to actually buy in to want to make any sort of change. And I think the same research has actually showed that like in terms of what's a meaningful like advantage, like you only really need like about 30 to 50 centimeters of separation, which makes a ton of sense. Like if you're a footballer and you're trying to whip in a cross, like if you're beating someone with a step over and then you're knocking the ball past them and then being able to just find that little yard of space to create a window to whip a ball in, like that's gonna lead to success. In my sport, in rugby, like sometimes just being able to accelerate that half a step quicker gets you to a weaker shoulder, or at the very least, if it doesn't necessarily mean you can go through a hole untouched, it might mean you find a weak shoulder, you get an arm tackle, which allows you to get an arm free, which then allows you to offload or find a pass, or at the very least, like make gain line, which is like so important. So actually, the effects that you need to make are very small. So when someone goes like, "Oh, what's the big deal about taking someone's 10-meter time from 1:72 to 1:69?" Actually, like when you extrapolate that out, that could be the difference. Like when it comes to can't coach speed, I think that's starting to fall away, as speed, as we well know, is this topic that everyone wants to talk about, everyone wants to have an opinion on. And yeah, like it's probably no surprise that it wasn't the quality of the video that I put out, it was just the topic. And so just, yeah, everyone's just lapping up anything to do with speed. And I probably, myself included, like again, the articles on that you have on Sportsmith, anything about speed, I'm probably reading it, even if it's good, bad, indifferent. It's still getting my eyeballs. So I imagine there are a lot of other people out there that feel the same. So
so it's amazing what a marketing message can do, isn't it?
Yeah,
it can run deep. Yeah, run deep
positive
into
or negative.
100%, absolutely. Is there any examples that you could give from, you don't have to mention players' names or anything like that, who've had positive results from some of the things like some of the things that you did in the videos? The examples there.
So probably, if I think of a couple of players that stick out in my mind the most through the years that I've worked with guys, I had one guy quite recently who ran a little bit different, a little bit odd. Was a decent enough rugby player, but his speed was one of the things that had been identified as maybe this is an area that we really need to make change. And he's coming in from the academy, so he's a young player and a little bit of a cult hero amongst the group. Like, he really, really like top lad, and like the lads took to him a lot. But like as young players do, they get a fair amount of ribbing and in speed because he ran a little bit differently technically, and in terms of his scores weren't necessarily the best when he first rocked up. Over time, again, spent a lot of work because that was the identified thing for him, was like in terms of his IDP of like what's going to be his limiting factor. So that then fell into my remit of like, okay, first of all, I've got to educate him on, again, how to move. And then we've got to then put the plan into place to solidify that technique, build the engine in terms of the physical capacities to be able to run fast. And we reached the sort of a peak point near the end of the season where one of the senior players came up to me and was like, man, like we're going to have to start taking the mick out of him because he's running faster times than us. And so it was like a real kind of moment for me of almost like pride that like he's getting bullied less because he's running faster. So yeah, like obviously we ideally want the performance benefits, but if it gave him more social standing in the group as well, then hey, it's a win-win.
Absolutely, that's great.
Yeah, like he's probably one that sticks out. And then I've got lots of cases of guys who've similar that I've been unable to change. I probably put that mainly down to myself, in that like through my journey of understanding what problems to look for and then how to fix them. So like Mike Young always talks about like, okay, what to see and what to say. And I think as I've progressed as a coach, I've got better at seeing the right things and spotting the signal from the noise, and then understanding, okay, what's going to help elicit some change in terms of either whether that's that technical running ability or understanding maybe what not to say, or this might be an intervention that needs to happen on field. This might be an intervention that needs to happen in the gym. This might be an intervention where they maybe need a little bit more time to understand the context of what we're doing with some of the drills. And like, I look back and like, again, when you do speed, when you first start, like, what does it look like? It's usually you're doing A skips, you're doing B skips, you're doing your kind of basics of prescription of drills. But even you might not fully know why you do it. It's just that's what everyone else does when it comes to speed training, and that's like, okay, monkey see, monkey do. But as I've progressed, I've started to understand like what the drills can give us in terms of like layering that context of when we actually put it into top end speed in sprinting or in acceleration. Like those drills layer on that context to the positions and the postures that you want. And then, yeah, if it like as a coach, your job is to make them understand the why, so that rather than it being 10 minutes of A skips and then they then go into rugby and they're like, why on earth was I doing that? Like actually making it understood, so you close the loop between, okay, if you're doing an A skip, all right, this is going to work on your pelvic position, which is then going to allow you to get more front side in your mechanics, which gives you more space to attack down to the ground. That's going to allow you to put more force into the floor, which then is going to help you at top end speed, run with better mechanics, better front side position, more force into the ground. That's going to allow you to run faster. And me as a young coach, I really didn't have that level of understanding. And as I've kind of spent a lot more time coaching and learning about this, you start to develop that level of understanding a little bit deeper. But there may be some environments, they're not at that stage yet.
Looking back, Pete, and I'm really interested in this now you've mentioned it, would there be anything that could have accelerated that learning for you to understand what to look for and where to spend your time? Is there any? It don't have to be resource. It could just be time with a particular group or particular culture. What would you package up as, if I could do this again, I'd do it this way because that could accelerate it?
Yeah, I think watch a ton of footage. Like, since we got to Bristol, and like I've spent so much time, because we record all of the guys' runs and you're reviewing it constantly, you can't help but start to notice things that are regularly reoccurring. And like, even if you don't have the subject knowledge, like I think something that sticks out for me was something that Mike Boyle said, that like, if it doesn't look right, then it probably isn't. And I was probably early on at that stage where I could tell you that something wasn't quite right, but I didn't necessarily have the guide rails to know, okay, that means that it's probably a problem with this. So I probably need to look at this. I need to investigate that. And then I need to cue this, which then leads to an outcome here. But yeah, like in terms of my development, like, you know, all of the kind of big hallmarks of the industry. So like Jonas Dodu's obviously helped me loads, and like having him as a soundboard sometimes, of like being able to like speak to him and be like, I'm seeing this. Are you sort of thinking the same lines? And then you start get that validation where you're like, okay, here's a guy who's really at the top of his game, and he's going, yeah, I'm seeing this, and I would do that. And you're like, that's exactly what I was going to do. And then you build that confidence in what you're seeing and what you're saying. Obviously, all the guys at Altis, look, who's who really of the guys you've had on your show, like guys like Les Spellman, like seeing him speak and some of the stuff that he puts out, really, really good. Cam Joss, the same. And like, all these are the guys at the real top end of the industry. But sometimes, obviously, we don't all have access to these people. Like, is having someone who's equally as passionate about this as you, to be able to just, maybe it might be just sending a clip and being like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, and maybe don't bias it. Don't say, I'm seeing this. What are your thoughts? Just, okay, would you fix this? Like, how would you go about cleaning this up? Or should I fix this? And having guys who are equally passionate about it. And I'm lucky that I've got a network of coaches that sometimes we'll have discussions around, or it'll be the odd WhatsApp. I might not speak to them for 2-3 months, but next thing you know, I've got a video in my inbox and I'm like, right, okay, let's have a little look at this. Okay, yeah, interesting. And then, okay, I don't know your context, and you're going to be the expert here to know what the athlete understands or doesn't understand. But I can certainly see there's a real big problem with his position and acceleration here. Like, that might be where I would spend most of my time. And yeah, just having that soundboard to be able to, like, not just be siloed on your own where you're like, I think this is right, but literally I have no idea. So yeah, having that network, I guess, of people that you can bounce ideas off of, and maybe when you are kind of real low down in that Dunning-Kruger curve where you're like, oh my God, I've got so much to learn, like having someone a little bit higher up than you to maybe go, yeah, no, you are seeing the right things here, or okay, maybe you're seeing this right, but actually your intervention maybe needs to be more like this. Again, that's going to accelerate your learning a lot. And yeah, I'm very thankful that guys like that, JB, Stu McMillan, like when I've reached out to them, have been class with their time and with their knowledge and expertise, I guess.
Great insights, mate. Right, next one on the list that I picked out was technical models are a waste of time for team sports. I think that's a really interesting one. It's come up multiple times with some of the people that you mentioned, Cam being one that springs to mind. And then, excuse me, and then just looking at the technical model and scoring system that you use and you outline in the article, kind of bringing that to life here, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. When it comes to technical models, I see the argument of why should we conform someone to run exactly how Usain Bolt runs? Because Usain Bolt is such an outlier. We shouldn't be trying to conform to what he does, because we're all going to be setting ourselves up for a fail. However, there are some key movement hallmarks for successful biomechanical efficiency, and I think you one of your guests that you had on recently, Sean Meisker. I really liked some of his thought process around like self-organization and discovery that way, especially from an agility perspective. But I sort of see it as like being along a continuum, that like the way like Sean Meisker on steroids, kind of everyone just finds out and just discovers it themselves, where there's no instruction, there's no guidance, which again, he would attest that's not how he coaches, but where it's very, very this way, compared to the like super hyper track coach where everyone runs how Ben Johnson runs because Charlie Francis said so. Like, we're at both ends of the spectrum here, and you need to understand where you are with your group. Like, I would say I'm probably more down Sean's end of thinking, but at the same time, you have to have some sort of end goal of like, okay, we're aiming to shoot towards something along these lines, because otherwise, like, how do you provide any context as to like how to change someone's movement if you don't have a model of at least this is what good sort of looks like? And then in the same way as like Stu McMillan says, that you got to learn the rules before you can break the rules. And so absolutely, you're going to have an athlete who maybe doesn't conform to the technical model, but can still be successful, still run efficiently, and still run fast. But like those cases are more rare than everybody else. And so, yeah, finding those movement hallmarks, or if you speak Franz Bosch language, then the like attractors that you're looking for, and having those kind of key things that you perhaps aiming to get from someone is going to help you along your coaching journey. And so the scoring system that I kind of bodged together just helps almost align my thought process when I am looking at the amount of footage that I'm looking at, is being able to, I guess, organize that in a way that isn't just me kind of going, yeah, he's good, he looks terrible. Like, okay, why is he terrible? What is he doing that isn't good? Because I can say, oh, this guy runs terrible. Great. Well, who's in charge of getting him better? It was me. So I better know why he's terrible and how to fix him being terrible. So this just provides a little bit more structure to me of, okay, right, like, okay, he's terrible at accelerating. Why? Well, he really, really struggles to project out. Cool. Why is that? Well, his shin angle is super upright, so he's not going to be able to lay any horizontal force down. Cool. So how do I fix that? Or I might want to get him into a more loaded position. All right, now I've nailed that position. Okay, actually, he doesn't have the engine to drive the car. So again, he's got the software now, but he really doesn't have the hardware. So then, right, okay, actually, I might then want to spend a little bit more time either in the gym developing his engine, or it might be I'm developing some of more of his specific strength to generate force in a horizontal direction. So what strategy does that lead me to use? That might be we're doing some very heavy resisted sled work. Again, if I've got somebody else who they then manage to nail that, but they're still not accelerating well, okay, well, it might be that they're not attacking back very well. So they're focused so much on the projection in their first step, they completely forget what their second step's doing. So they might be casting out a little bit, so their shin's just falling out in front. So they're landing out too far in front of their body mass, then having to roll over before they can push again. So then it might be like, right, okay, if that's the fix, then I might strip it right back and go, right, we're going to do some wall drills and we're going to do some switching so that they're actually attacking back like a piston to the floor so that they're getting that second bit. And then I might be layering it all together with a first, second, third step projection where they get the projection on the first step, but they're also attacking back. Then we put it into the whole skill. Right now we're just running through gates and I just want to look at the time. Right, have you got that loaded position? Have you got that shin angle? Are you projecting out? Now are you attacking back? Can you do it repeatedly with rhythm? Yes. That should lead to better outcomes. If the answer is no there, then at least you've got your, this is where we're falling down and I now need to bridge that gap. So having some sort of technical model to lead towards just helps you as a coach. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to like push that onto the players. It just means it gives them something to perhaps like to shoot for. I think of it as a sort of an analogy of we shouldn't be laying the path for them, but we should be providing perhaps the guide rails and the direction. So we're almost like a tour guide going like, right, okay, we're climbing Mount Everest. There's multiple paths to take, but like you can't go left because you're going to fall off the mountain. But if we go right in some sort of direction, then we're going to move towards movement mastery and climbing Mount Everest. So I think our job as coaches is to understand that we need to provide some of those guide ropes without being overly prescriptive, going, right, you need to put your left foot here, your right foot here, and follow my tracks exactly, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So do you score these subjectively? Do you put a number on it so you can track progress? How do you do it?
So full disclosure, probably I don't use that scoring system as much anymore.
Okay.
But that sort of helped me when I was just starting out doing some maybe deeper analysis to have something to fall back on, because sometimes quantifying the qualitative, so like looking at video and knowing like, he's good at frontside mechanics. Is he? Or is he not? Or is it just my bias and my subjectivity? So like having things like Johan Lahti's kickback score, I don't know if you've seen some of that stuff that he's put out, like is a really, really good kind of starting point to a conversation around, okay, someone runs with really good frontside mechanics, or he's very much backside dominant. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but like if he's got a history of hamstring injuries and he struggles to run at top end speed and he's a good accelerator, but at max velocity he struggles, then that's leaving you some clues as to, okay, there might be some juice left to squeeze here where we can make some change positively with changing someone's movement mechanics. So yeah, like I have that, but probably more and more so now I'm looking at the video and then just going off of my own coaching eye. But like, obviously there's hours and hours and hours and hours of watching footage that's gone into that. Like for me to be able to go, yeah, that's fine. Whereas, yeah, if it's me 2-3 years ago, I'd be using that scoring system as a crutch big time just to help me understand that I've got guys pitched at the right level, I think.
Excellent. Again, love it. So the next one was you can't change a movement pattern that's ingrained. And one thing that came to mind when I wrote that, the kind of sub point was getting slower to get faster. And that was one thing that I spoke to, James Wild spoke a lot about, was actually identifying things and accepting that sometimes they might actually get slower and not panicking because it is the right decision, because that will kick in time and they will get faster. So yeah, explain that point to us and your experience in it.
Yeah, well, the players will remind you very, very quickly. I had it this preseason. Pete, we're doing more speed training than ever done. I'm getting slower. And you're like, because it's a work in progress. And like, again, speed is such a transient quality that is reliant on so many different things. Like in preseason, it could just be simply because we're like working them much, much harder. We're pushing them to the edge. Actually, freshness isn't there and fatigue is masking that freshness. And so we're actually getting like worse outputs. So it's got nothing to do with the coaching or the technical proficiency of that guy or not. It's just to do with he's absolutely knackered from the training that he's doing. So yeah, don't get me wrong. The players will remind you of that. But like, I think it's ironic actually because he's part of our coaching staff now. But a few years ago, I was reading Dave Ulrich's book, The Pressure Principle. He's the Johnny Wilkinson's kicking coach and work with a lot of golfers and other guys there. But he spoke about like learning and reaching that sort of messy zone of learning, where actually if you are trying to change someone's mechanics, at first it's going to be pretty messy. You're not going to get like good outcomes, but understanding that that's part of the process. Like how often as coaches have you said a cue to someone and all of a sudden it's fixed like that and you're like, wow, like patting yourself on the back, how good of a coach am I? And then the next session they're right back to how they used to move and you're like, what's changed? So yeah, it's like taking those elements of understanding that the process isn't going to be linear, and actually probably if we want to maximize learning, we want some element of failure in there. So that failure rate can't be 0%, because otherwise what we're tasking the guys to do is too easy. We actually had a really good example of this in preseason this year. A guy joined us he's a fairly young player, joined from the lower leagues. So in terms of training age, very, very little exposure to kind of higher end athletic performance. A sponge, so he's picking up things. When he first arrived, like your archetype butt kicker, like really flicky out the back, and I'm like, right, without even seeing you, like this was literally just in a training session. I'm like, we need to get to work on you, because like there's some things that are quite obviously we can make a change with. And as a coaching group, like a few of the coaches work with him. So I can't claim this as my own, because a few of the other guys at Bears did some really good work with him. And within like 4 weeks, we were doing a rolling fly effort, and he's like, perfect picture, front side mechanics. He's tall, he's running smooth, he's relaxed, and I'm like, wow, like I wish we'd filmed him from week one, because this is the like perfect like social media. Look at how much change you can make with someone. And like it was like, this is brilliant. And then the next session we were playing conditioned games where we were really redlining guys, like really pushing guys to the edge, and he's hanging on, like literally like blowing out of his ring piece. And like he's running, and he's running almost like he's trying to tear off his hamstring, because he's basically kicking himself in the back of the head with his feet. He's so backside. And it was a good check for me that, like, again, learning is a process, and it's not all of a sudden the light bulbs come on and now he runs perfectly. Like, this is a movement skill that hasn't been fully ingrained yet, but we have made progress. So you celebrate the wins when he's fresh, but currently under fatigue. And I imagine if we like played a live game, he's going to run again along that continuum. He's going to run more like his natural state, but we have started to shift him across. And so again, with time and with effort and constantly revisiting what he needs to work on, we can hopefully solidify that movement pattern so he runs in a more efficient and perhaps potentially safer manner. So yeah, I think you can change it, but like again, it's a process and it takes time.
So is it just time and keep doing the same things, or is there something that you would see in that exact same example go, maybe we need to incorporate something that's that kind of transition in between that fresh phase and that fatigue phase to move the needle that way?
Yeah, I think once, I guess if we take that failure rate concept of when someone's doing it well in a closed setting, in a athletic performance led warm up where the coaches aren't involved, there's not a ball involved, they're just running a straight line, there's not a lot of decision making, there's not a lot of other cues, it's just running a straight line. Like, it's as simple as you can make it. If they're still not doing it there, they probably ain't going to do it when they come into the training. So nail it there. And once that failure rate disappears to the point where they're able to nail it there, what do you then do? You pressurize it. So you might add competition. So then it might be that they're racing against someone. So then they're focused on beating the next man. Do they run with those backside mechanics again? It could be that you add a layer of complexity and specificity that they run with the ball, or they run offline. So they're running arcs, or they might be beating a defender and then getting into upright positions, and you're just adding layers of complexity more and more and more to the point where, okay, now it's, can they do it in a training session? So in a 15 on 15, they've made a break, and can they execute the skill that you've worked on in a game setting when they absolutely should not be thinking about frontside mechanics there, because they're like, again, their mental headspace should be thinking about, what decisions am I making? How, like, what passes are on? What kicks are on? Where's the space? What's the defender doing? Like, they shouldn't be thinking, okay, remember what Pete said about frontside mechanics and pelvic position, like that. If they're thinking that, then like I've not done my job well enough. So yeah, like understanding that process to eventually get to the point where hopefully they start doing it in a game setting where there's 20,000 people watching them and they really aren't thinking about it and it comes to them naturally. I'd love to say that it's an easy process, but as you well know, like you have one athlete, the light bulb comes on in 2 weeks, huge fix, big change, and you have someone else, it takes 2 years, and you're trying all the different strategies, different cues, and nothing seems to work. But that's coaching, isn't it? So,
have you ever been in a situation where you've chosen a particular path to go, the athlete has regressed, and you're actually struggling to make that progress back up down this new path?
Yeah, like quite a few times actually, to be honest. Like again, that's part of, like, again, we're developing, like the players are developing, like, and you tend to remember the athletes that you weren't able to change, or that you made worse than the ones that you did, and the ones that I could probably list off with great clarity the people who got injured in my session where was that me? Was that my fault? Was it something we did? Did we manage the loads right? Was this pitched effectively? Were we too aggressive with X, Y, Z? And you remember all of those, but probably don't remember the like 6 or 7 other lads that actually did make progress. But yeah, definitely, like, yeah, you make mistakes, and there are some guys that you spent a lot of work on, and you're like, they haven't got any better, and they've spent a decent chunk of training time. Could that have been better spent elsewhere? Could they have been working on their skills? Could they have been working on other physical capacities? Could they have simply just been resting and spending their mental energy elsewhere, so they were a bit fresher going into training and into games, which ultimately is the more important thing. So yeah, that question bugs me quite regularly.
You mentioned the process you'd go through to actually understand whether it's a technical thing or it's a software or it's a hardware thing, it's a physical thing or it's a technical thing. Is there anything that you do which gives you more clarity on that question quicker than going through the process that you did in terms of certain profiling or certain physical testing, or is it always the process that you outlined?
No, like this pre-season, to try and take our speed program up a level, like we've tried to take the concept of bucketing guys off, in part to utilize all of our coaching resources. Again, we've got a great coaching team with lots of passionate people about speed in our office. So like it really isn't me. Like it's really a top down. Like it comes from our head coach. He's invested in it. He sometimes comes and watches the speed sessions. He's interested in the times that the guys run, so the players know that this is something that the guy that picks the team is interested in. So all of a sudden they're bought in more. Again, my boss is super invested in it, and he supports the rest of us to coach, and we get probably a lot more coaching time than most environments do, to work on both generic speed and our kind of specific game speed, more integrated type work. And yeah, like I'd say when we split to bucket guys off, in part it was to get more, like, reduce our coach to player ratio, but it was also to kind of see if we could be a little bit more specific to the players' needs. And as part of that process, we did some profiling. Again, it's nowhere near as in depth as maybe Coach Grubbs's like kind of profiling that he's done. So we tried to kind of marry up some of the quantitative stuff with more just qualitative stuff of like videos. So like the process was, we had a couple of categories of like any obvious front side issue, obvious shin angle issue, any obvious stiffness loss, any obvious torso issue, whether that's like over rotated or hunched in a banana back position or chest out way too much, overloading their like lower backs. And basically this was just a binary 1-0, watching the footage, anything that stuck out. If the answer was yes to one of those, they got a 1. We then looked at their RSIs, ranked that. We were looking to do some of James Wild's like glute strength ISO assessment. We didn't really get a chance to do that, but through the rest of our gym programming, we could kind of tell some guys who like, yeah, they really don't have the hardware to be able to project themselves well. So that was a sort of bit wishy-washy, but like we were able to group guys. So yeah, utilize those things. Did we do anything else? We utilized the kickback score to kind of quantify maybe some technical deficits, and then we split guys off into 4 groups. So we had three main groups. One was a stiffness group, so guys with a stiffness issue. So that was, again, you can't run on flat tires, so our job was to try and improve, pump their tires up a little bit, so that they get more energy return out of the ground. So that was their low-hanging fruit. So these guys in their sessions maybe did a little bit more plyos, a little bit more stretch shortness cycle reactive base work. It didn't mean that they did no technical work. It just meant in terms of the training pie, more of it was garnered towards that. We had a physical group, which again is if you've got a 1 litre engine versus a 5 litre engine, again, the 5 litre engine, all things being equal, is going to like run past you. So for those guys, yeah, they're probably spending a little bit more time doing resisted speed work. It's maybe more force driven in terms of the exercise selection that we're choosing. And in terms of the cues as well, like the stiffness guys might be told to like pop off the ground and push, don't smush on the contact. Whereas the physical guys, it might be like tear the ground away, push the floor back, those kind of cues, like a fighter jet taking off type visualizations. And then our third group was a technical group. And these guys, again, it was obvious technical deficiencies where they may have done a little bit more drill-based work to really nail the context of running with good postures. Because, again, like Lauren Landau says, like, and you've got to have the position and the posture before you can add the power. And so for those guys, it was, okay, they might have the hardware, they might have the 5-litre engine, and they might have their tyres pumped up, but the driver is an absolute clown. So, like, if you don't have the right driver, then, again, if you put me in a Formula One car, I'm going to crash the car, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm either not going to go fast or I'm going to crash it. So for those guys, it was, okay, can we work on the driver a little bit more so that they can run it safely, so that hopefully they don't get injured when they run, and hopefully run it more effectively and efficiently so they can run faster. And then we split guys off. So as part of our pre-season, we split guys off into those groups. So they had maybe a smaller group, more met towards their needs, so we can make bigger change. There was a fourth group, which is a remedial group, which is the guys who maybe can't handle the surface or can't handle the amount of stretch shortened cycle load, or new guys who we weren't aware fully of their training load, or like how much exposure they'd had to speed training in their past. So like new signings, academy players, where we just wanted to be a little bit safer with grading their exposure to speed training. And these guys did some more like remedial type work where it was lower impact, while still trying to get some of the cues and the basics of our philosophies out towards them. That was our sort of profiling system that we've started to integrate this year. Some really, really positives, some bits that we can clean up, and other areas where it's like, are we really making any difference between the two things here? Could we amalgamate groups? Definitely, but when we review our pre-season, I think that will come to kind of decide as to what went well and what didn't.
So good. People will find that really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I know I say that I'm not like been condescending or anything, but I think it's so good when to hear you speak about so openly about the things that you do. So really appreciate that. Next one was, it's too risky to train speed. That was one of the myths.
Yeah,
I'm sure you like that one. Do people, that's still a common thing that you come across?
I think so. My instant answer to that is it's just as risky to not train it. But obviously there's context. Like, again, if you're getting max velocity exposures in your training sessions, then doing it in a standalone session, is it that necessary? Probably not. But again, if our game demands compared to our practice demands are very different, then there needs to be something done to bridge that gap. And so if in training you're getting nowhere close to max velocity, yet in their games they're getting exposure to it, then that's a risky kind of game to play, where you're just hopefully crossing your fingers and hoping that they don't get hurt when they're exposed to games, and like getting max V there. Like, I think some of the people that perhaps say it's too risky, I 100% agree. Like, even now, like, we're in my third season and I'm sometimes still crossing my fingers, like, I really hope no one goes down, because there's nothing worse. And like, touch wood, luckily, like, because we've been smart with our exposure to guys and risk managed and mitigated risk effectively from a medical perspective and an AP perspective, spotting the car crash before it happens, we've been able to hopefully mitigate some of those things. But yeah, like, if you don't expose them to it, like, you're in trouble, because again, in the same way as from a conditioning perspective, and there's the big kind of chat around, like, are we fit enough? Do we meet peak game intensities, game demands and stuff? I'm trying to align ourselves to what the international standard of peak game intensities are, and getting really, really in depth with that. Well, we should be the same with the game demands when it comes to a speed perspective too. So, like, if there is that gap, then that's a gap in our program that perhaps either we need to constrain the coaches to see if we can create it in session, which is the ideal, really, that like invisible thread of training where you're that guiding hand where they're getting it within either large, small-sided games and things like that. But if you're not able to do that, then there probably is a place for some standalone artificial velocity exposure, whether that's in a speed session or within the session itself. Doesn't really matter as long as you've built up towards it. Like, we're lucky that most of our guys are pretty tolerant to it, that even this week, we've had a shorter training week. Some guys, especially our forwards, didn't really pick up an exposure above 90%. We're playing a 15 on 15 like training drill. We've got maybe 10, 15 guys on the sideline, of which 4 or 5 we red flagged during the session live as like, they needed an exposure. It was like, right, they're warm now. You're not needed in the drill for 3 minutes. From the halfway line, just run to the touchline, go. Like, it took 25 seconds and we got all the guys above 90%. Like, that's so unintrusive to the training plan as a whole, and it's easy to perform. Obviously, if you've never done speed training before and you just jump that in, you'd be crossing your fingers going, I hope that the coach hasn't watched me pull 3 hamstrings just off the side in an unplanned like training intervention. But yeah, certainly, like, there's like, I feel like pretty strongly that we have to expose guys to those training demands. And I think it was Malone showed I think it was a GAA study that like guys above 95%, the like sweet spot was between 6 to 10 exposures a week. We found with our guys, we're maybe more down on the lower end of that. Like, we aim to give our guys like 1 to 2 artificial exposures of speed. So that's within a speed session, or kind of at the end of a warm up where we do a rolling effort. So that's build from the try line to the 22, and then from the 22 to the near 10, you're going. And that's ideally dependent on where we're at. That's above 90%. In preseason, week 1, it was 85. Week 2, it was, okay, between 85 and 90. Week 3, it was above 90. Week 4, right, okay, can we get to 95 and above? And then the weeks after, it was like, right, the shackles are off. If you feel really good, let's really open up now and let's see if we can light the turbos. And that's where we've ended up with guys running like PBs. But equally, there's that catch-all that if you're not quite right, and the Ferraris that we have that are very body aware, they're like, I'm not quite aligned, or I'm not really feeling activated in my hips, whatever that means. You can say, okay, like if you're not feeling good, then let's just see if we can get above 80, because then at least getting something. And then, yeah, when you feel right, let's chase it. So yeah, we'll usually pick up 2 artificial exposures in our training week. Maybe more towards the backs, they'll pick up about 2 more. And we classify as an exposure, so our sports scientist classifies an exposure as, I think it's above 90% for over a second. So it's not like a quick spike, it's a sustained short effort above 90%. In our backs, we usually pick up 2. In our forwards, it's a little less in training just because they get less opportunity to do it. And then in game, again, it's varied, again, based off of opportunity, but the forwards usually pick up close to 1, the backs 2 to 4. So we're probably looking at between 2 to 5 exposures a week of max velocity. Again, dependent on other sports, like I'm looking at football here, like in bigger spaces, they're probably getting more exposure in game because they get more opportunities as the ball gets kicked in behind and they're chasing it. In training as well, they're probably playing over larger spaces over time. I know that the Barca style of play is everything small tiki-taka, but like when they do open it up, again, the game of football will allow a lot more opportunity. So like, yeah, within football, that their sweet spot might be much higher. But for us, we found that, yeah, somewhere around there is usually a good spot for us.
Again, superb. The next one that was the other myth was they already get speed exposures in sessions, but you've kind of covered that there. Anything you want to add on that last one?
No, I guess just once you've built guys up, you forget how easy and quick it can be. Like to do 2 rolling efforts or fly efforts, and I have to credit Matt Reeves at Leicester City, who was a guy that we picked a lot of these top-ups up from. I think he calls them runways, which, yeah, is a build into a fly run. to do 2 of them, you have one warm-up rep where ideally you're getting some time above 80%. Give them 2 minutes of recovery, 3 minutes ideally if you're a track coach. But as we know with team sports players, they want to go pretty much as soon as they're back. So constrain it so they have to walk back to you. So you build in at least 1.5 minutes of recovery. And then they're like, yeah, I'm good. And they'll run through and they're done. That's taken 3 minutes, either at the end of a warm-up or at the end of a session as a top-up, or even in session, if they don't have to have eyes on training and they're maybe repped out because you've got starters in. Again, in rugby, you probably get a little bit more repping in and out than you do in football. But you can just take them on the sideline, right? We know the drill, go do it. Bosh, you've got your GPS usually done live. A yes, no, yeah, you've done it, ticked off. Like, you then know that you're giving them that speed vaccine. You know that you've given them that high velocity exposure from a fascicle lengthening perspective, from a protective effect of hamstrings. You're getting everything you need there. So it can be really, really easy. The issue is obviously you need buy-in right away from the top so that when things do go wrong, you know that you've answered the why and you've got performance in mind and the bigger goal in mind. Obviously, it gets tougher if you end up pulling 5 guys' hamstrings for the biggest game of the year. Then you're in the shit. But yeah, hopefully, if you've been smart with building up, you don't end up at that point. But yeah, so far so good for me. But
keep it going. Keep that going. Right, mate. Well, thank you very much. I think that's a good place to finish there. I know we had how you develop these various different things, but would you think we've covered some of that?
Yeah, well, again, I'm happy to and this is an area of passion. So for me,
oh well, boom, right.
Not talking about this is a bigger issue than getting me to shut up. I think is a bigger problem. But yeah, I guess the one thing would be, again, we've spoken a lot about quite generic speed in terms of straight line and improving just straight line speed. But I think where the real money's made is in that contextual speed. So game speed, agility, change of direction, whatever kind of your buzzword is for that. I think that's where we can really make change, and where I've certainly learned a lot probably from the coaches and the players that I've worked with, because they're the true experts there of understanding how speed may or may not affect the game. And again, sometimes if we can get caught thinking quite siloed with okay, they're faster, so they must be better. But actually, that's not the case. It's like the new age thinking of the guys in the early 2000s of everyone could squat better, so that meant everyone was better. I've done my job. Well, why isn't performance going up? Well, it's the same thing with speed. You can improve their mechanics and you can chat about their PBs that they've ran, but if it hasn't transferred, then what's the point? And so I think that integrative piece where you're working a lot more with the coaches has been an area of huge growth for me, from learning from our coaching staff and knowing where physical performance can perhaps lend a hand, whether that's in a integrated fashion or more of a standalone fashion. And a couple of examples I guess I've had is chatting to one of our veteran players. We've got a kid who's absolutely rapid, really, really, really good physical capacities. He's really quick, but in terms of his technical capabilities, he was questioning. He was like, yeah, he's really fast, but maybe he might not be able to execute his skills at that speed. And so again, to take this just as a base example, if you've got someone who can run 10 meters per second, but they can't pass faster than, say, 7 meters per second, well, what's going to happen? They have to slow down to effectively pass. Whereas you might have somebody else who runs 9 meters per second, but they've got better skills at speed. They can pass at 8 meters per second. Well, who's going to have more effective speed? Well, it's going to be the guy who, in a straight line, isn't running as quick. And so the S&C coaches are probably he ain't as good. But actually, the rugby coaches are going, nah, this is the guy that we want to pick. And probably the best example of that is that clip that does the rounds on Twitter every now and again of Usain Bolt versus Jamie Carragher. I don't know if you've seen that, where you've got literally the fastest guy alive in, I think it was a soccer aid game. They kick the ball in behind, they play the through ball, and you've got Usain Bolt against Jamie Carragher, who's, no offense, wasn't known for his pace when he was in his heyday.
Yeah.
He's
retired for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. Retired for 5 or 6 years in the booth with Gary Neville. And yet his game speed, because he spotted the spotted the danger quickly. He's got his body across. His perceptual speed is much quicker. Usain Bolt, who, again, is great in a straight line, but just hasn't had the reps to understand the game at that level. And so he's just running a straight line, hasn't got his body across. Jamie Carragher's able to shepherd him away from goal when this is a situation where it should be a one-on-one, shepherd him away from goal. And then you're looking at Usain Bolt's skills, which have let him down. So he's had a real heavy touch and he's given the ball away. And it's like, Jamie Carragher's got a PhD in his sport and he's got game speed versus that guy, like, again, when you play like FIFA, you pick the guy with 99 pace, but like has no awareness. Actually, like, this is a prime example of that. Someone who can run really, really well in a straight line, but maybe doesn't have the game speed, the understanding, the perceptual skills, plus the actual skill to execute effectively. So that's been eye-opening for me, is understanding that agility piece and where we can perhaps assist with speed drills with skills at the end of it, or speed drills with perceptually rich drills where we're making decisions, whether that's with one-on-ones in big spaces, small spaces, and things like that. And that's something that, like, I feel we can really, really learn a lot from the rugby coaches and our kind of sport coaches, because they're the experts. And those are the sessions that I love delivering, because it's where we truly get to integrate, where you're on a level standing. And I'm very lucky. Our position coaches will come out and they'll provide wisdom and then throw it back to me, and I get to make a point, maybe a little bit more linked to straight line speed, but then we bounce back and forth. And my rugby IQ has just gone like this because I'm like learning from them. So I think that's where, again, the guys that you've had on your podcast, when you had Eddie Jones and JC and those kind of guys on, of like, actually, like, we're almost an assistant coach. Like, it doesn't mean that we're just on the field now. We forget about the basics of our bread and butter of being in the gym and delivering that stuff with quality. But sometimes, A, it's going to get us better buy-in with the coaches, but B, and the players, but B, it is another level that we can have impact, and we can add value, I guess. That's probably it. You'll get me another hour and a half. Get me to shut up now before I go on.
Ironically, we'd already kind of penciled in a part 2 on a different topic, but that could be then pushed to a part 3, and this becomes the part 2.
People are already probably bored of listening to me, so, but if the people want it, sure.
Yeah, of course. No, that sounds good to me. Right, mate, I'm going to let you crack on with your evening, because I've had you sat here for the last hour and 20 minutes, even though we've been on record for just over an hour. So, Pete, I really appreciate your time. Where can people find more out about you, all your viral tweets, your videos, all that kind of stuff?
Twitter's probably the best place to find me. I'm on other social media, but you won't find anything interesting, I doubt, if you're S&C Nors. If you're interested in beaches, perhaps you might like my Instagram, but there's not a lot really going on there. Facebook's for my old school friends to stalk me, and for my extended family to look at photos of and like random photos of me.
All the boomers on there.
So yeah, Twitter's definitely the place to find me, where I'll try and share some bits every now and again. But that's probably the best place to interact with me, or via email.
Perfect. Right, I'm going to let you crack on with your evening. Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Rob,
thank you for coming on. Thank you for the last hour and 20 minutes. And keep in touch, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.